everyone, welcome to Introduction to Dog Reactivity. What does it mean and what can we do about it? This is going to be a basic look at why dogs react and what we can do about it. One of the most important things to remember is that reactivity is a construct. If you've taken our body language course, you'll remember that there's a difference between overt behaviors, behaviors we can actually see, versus covert behaviors, which are emotions, feelings, things going on inside someone's mind. And then constructs are theories or ideas based on those covert behaviors. So when we talk about reactivity, remember that it's a subjective term and there can be a lot of different ideas about it. So what one person calls reactivity might not be the same as another person's definition of it. So always remember to observe the dog's behavior, their overt behaviors. What were they actually doing? And that could constitute a lot of different things. The dog could just be staring at something, be fixated, leaning forward, being highly aroused. They might be doing some kind of displacement behavior, like suddenly digging in the ground, making like huffing type noises. What we usually think of is bigger reactions, things like pulling hard on the leash, spinning, jumping up in the air, running along the fence line. You could certainly have lunging, snapping, redirecting onto the leash, or bite climbing up the leash, or even trying to redirect onto the handler. But the most common thing that we see and most people's concern is usually some kind of vocalization like growling, barking, whining, or even screaming. Essentially, any reaction a dog has to any stimulus in any situation could be described as reactivity. So we always want to know what it is that you actually saw. And when I talk about reaction in this class, I'll reference dog-to-dog reactivity, but all of this is relevant for a dog's reaction to people or even to inanimate objects. We typically see reactivity when a dog has limited options. So a lot of times we see reactivity when a dog's restrained in some way, either being on a leash, a chain, or being held by a person. We see it when there's barriers a lot of the time, like when the dogs are in their kennels, behind a fence, or if they're in a home at a window or door. We could call resource guarding sometimes a type of reactivity. A lot of times people will use terms like, oh, the dog's territorial, or the dog's protective. That basically boils down to some kind of resource guarding, which is them trying to prevent someone from getting to or hurting or interfering with something that they value. So that could be food, toys, a resting spot, a person, or even an area like their backyard or even a neighborhood. But reactivity can be to people, dogs, any kind of animal, any object. Dogs tend to view things in pretty simple ways. They can view things as familiar or unfamiliar, safe or unsafe, or predictable or unpredictable. A lot of times when we're working with reactivity, we're trying to help the dog feel that things are more familiar, safe, and predictable. Even if they feel that something is unsafe, it's much better for them to know what to expect than to have it be also unpredictable. Everyone wants to know, why is the dog reactive? Why are they doing it? Usually we don't have any kind of history on the dog. They're coming to us fresh without much background. So we have to really think about, well, maybe why are they reacting in this moment rather than worrying about something in their past. A lot of times reactions are motivated by fear. It could say, go away, I need space, I don't know what you are, I don't know what's going to happen. So some kind of anxiety or fear. It could be some type of arousal. The dog is just really excited to see someone or another dog or see something. Or the dog could maybe want to go after that thing. So we say they're either, I'm so excited to see you, or maybe eat you. It can also be frustration. Maybe the dog wants to go closer to something and isn't able to. Maybe they're not being allowed to have something. or they just don't understand maybe why something's happening or what a person wants from them, and that can lead to reactivity. Essentially, what they're doing is trying to communicate. It's important to remember that the dog's not doing this because they're a jerk or they're mean or they're trying to talk back or cause problems. Dogs bark and have reactions because they're experiencing something and they're trying to communicate it. And when we view it in that way, we can be a lot more empathetic. So if we're trying to determine what's motivating the dog, either fear, frustration, arousal, we want to look at their body language. Obviously, if the dog is more loose and wiggly, perhaps we're just seeing something more like play or excitement. If the dog has kind of neutral body language or they look generally alert, it could be just some kind of expressing of themselves or alert barking like, hey, someone's at the door, just want to let you know there's a person over there. And sometimes it can be to scare something off or make a threat. So if you look at the body language, that can kind of tell us what the dog is feeling. It's also important to really pay attention when you encounter reactivity, and especially if you're trying to relay that information to someone else. You really want to pay attention to your environment, what just happened, what's happening while the reactivity is going on, where are you, what's the location, and who or what is around. So especially if it's something novel, a stranger, garbage truck, something unexpected. It's also important to know how well do you know the dog. Sometimes the dog may be behaving differently because they don't know you as well. That could be adding to some kind of discomfort. But sometimes dogs may just bark because they enjoy barking. Maybe it's really normal for them to bark consistently. It's important to know that as opposed to if it's a sudden behavior change. And sometimes knowing past experience can be helpful. A lot of times we can also determine how the dog is feeling by the quality of the dog's vocalizations. Is it really high-pitched? Is it really low and grumbly? Is it staccato? Is it wavering? All of these things can help us understand maybe how the dog is feeling. And if you click on that link, quality of the dog's vocalizations, there actually are studies that are trying to figure that out. And one of the most important things to remember is that just because a dog is reacting doesn't mean that the dog, say, wants to hurt a person or another dog, doesn't indicate aggression necessarily. And it's also important to remember that just because the dog isn't reacting, that doesn't mean that something isn't going on inside. In fact, some of the most offensive dogs that want to go after dogs or people, often are some of the most quiet and subtle dogs that don't give a big reaction. So in this video, we see an example of a dog that ends up having a pretty big reaction to another dog, but doesn't show, isn't barking, isn't lunging in the beginning, but you can see the husky's aroused body posture, how tall they're standing, leaning forward, their mouth is tight and closed, tail's all the way up and over, they try to turn their head away, and then we finally end up having a reaction. So just because the dog's not barking and making noise doesn't mean that they're going to be okay with another dog. You have to pay attention to the body language. So a lot of people, part of wanting to know the why, a lot of people want some kind of explanation. We don't always know, but we can sometimes make guesses. A dog may have reactions to things because of a lack of socialization, especially as a young puppy. If they don't have a lot of exposure to a lot of different things, they may be more likely to react to it because it's unfamiliar, or they may think it's unsafe. It could be a lack of training. The dog doesn't know what else to do. Maybe the dog has always barked at the door, but nobody's ever taught the dog, hey, instead of barking at the door, you could go grab a toy and lie on your bed. They've never been given an option. The dog's never been taught how to walk nicely and greet another dog. They've only ever barked and run and pulled on leash to say hi to another dog. Sometimes we might get a reaction because there's a perceived lack of choice. A dog might feel like they need to react and make noise because they feel like they can't get away. That's why this is so common when a dog's in a kennel or behind a barrier or on a leash. If they feel like they don't have the option to move away from whatever it is they're reacting to, they feel like, hey, I have to bark or try and scare it away or react to it in some way. Sometimes reactivity can be the result of inadvertent reinforcement. For example, if a dog has gotten into the habit of barking at their owner while they're eating, and the owner eventually gives them some food to make them be quiet, we've reinforced that barking. Or even if the dog is barking for attention, and the owner says, no, shh, tries to get them to be quiet, well, the dog's just gotten attention. The owner didn't mean to give them reinforcement, but since they gave the dog attention and that's what they wanted, that behavior is going to continue. There's also a concept of emotional contagion, and that basically means that emotions are contagious. You can pick it up in people, so when you have a mob mentality, one angry person kind of spreads to other people, or if there's an anxious person in the room, that can make other people anxious. That can apply from people to dogs or dogs to other dogs. So you've seen this in action when one dog starts barking on a row and then all the other dogs start barking. Or if you have two dogs in a home and one never used to bark at other dogs on leash, but a new dog does, a lot of times the original dog will join in. Another really common reason for a big reaction is because of trigger stacking. This is when a dog experiences multiple stressors within a more limited amount of time. People can experience this too, similar to waking up late, oversleeping your alarm clock, spilling coffee on yourself, being stuck in traffic, and then finally getting into work and then being snappy with someone. They didn't do anything wrong. You wouldn't normally be snappy with that person, but because of the situation of your day, be experiencing so many different stressors, you end up having a reaction. So this can happen when a dog experiences a lot of stressors in a short period of time. They're way more likely to react to things that they wouldn't if they weren't experiencing so much stress. So obviously in a kennel environment, dogs are exposed to stressors all day long, day after day. So they never really have the opportunity to decompress and let their stress hormones go back to normal. So what do we do about it? There are a lot of different things we can do to deal with reactivity, depending on the dog's motivation and reason for being reactive. If a dog's barking out of fear, maybe they want to stay back in their cubby and they don't want to come closer, we go through our shy dog protocol, which we have another presentation on that. But it's essentially giving the dog space, time, not pushing them too hard, but stepping back and letting them approach on their own time. If we don't pressure them, they may be less likely to react. We'll see an example of treat and retreat in just a moment. We'll also talk about systematic desensitization and counter-conditioning. Look at that, behavior adjustment training, and impulse control. That's essentially trying to teach the dog to hold back from doing whatever it is that they want to do. Whether, let's say, pulling on leash or barking at every little noise in the house. We can work on rewarding them for being patient and waiting and build up that impulse control so they learn how to hold back from doing what they want to do immediately. There is something called a relaxation protocol. This was developed by Dr. Karen Overall, a veterinary behaviorist, and this is a really regimented exercise that can be really helpful for dogs that are reactive in the home, that may bark at a lot of different noises or stimuli. It helps them learn how to relax on a mat and not pay attention to various stimuli around them. We'll talk about the Premack Principle in a moment. And here we will help dogs with reactivity a lot of times through parallel walks in order to maybe get them a little bit closer to the thing they're working on, or just for safety, we will do muzzle training so that we can actually move forward safely with some of these activities. And a lot of times we'll just use management to help keep the dogs and people safe and reduce their overall stress level by trying to prevent them from reacting in the first place. This is an example of treat and retreat with a fearful dog who is reacting. So it's important to note this dog is fearful. They're staying back, their tail is low, the ears are kind of backing out to the side. You can see their mouth is closed.
Princess girl.
Okay. So treat and retreat is really helpful for dogs that are fearful of people. We want them to feel comfortable approaching, and we want it to be their choice as much as possible. We don't want to pressure them by leaving a little breadcrumb trail of treats, sort of forcing them to get closer to us. A lot of dogs may be highly motivated to get the food, but still extremely fearful of the person. You'll notice that that's the case if the dog approaches really slowly, maybe they're creeping up, or they're really snatching at treats and running away. We want to make the dog feel comfortable and know that the human's putting no pressure on them. So you can toss a treat past the dog so they get to walk away, they get rewarded for moving away from the thing that scares them, but then they can also make the choice to come closer. Every time the dog comes closer, we'll toss another treat and they can go back, get the treat, and come closer. And it's a really effective way of working with dogs that are fearful with people. The most common way and the most effective way to deal with a fear or a phobia or anything that a dog dislikes is through desensitization and counter conditioning. This is different than the type of training where we just teach the dog what to do or not do. What we want is to change how they feel about something. So if we punished a dog every time it barked at something, the dog might stop barking because they're trying to avoid the punishment. However, it's not going to change how the dog feels about the thing that they reacted to. So we want to help them feel better about that potentially scary thing. Desensitization means we're exposing them to the trigger at a level they can handle. Whether that's farther away, at a lower intensity, just finding that place where the dog can handle it and not go over threshold, which we'll talk about in a minute, where they can look at the thing and not have a reaction. Counter conditioning means pairing something the dog may not like with something that the dog loves. So in this example, we've got a mail delivery truck. If there's a distance where the dog can look at the delivery truck and the delivery truck predicts that, oh boy, cheese will come, the dog will start to look at the delivery truck and think, oh, yay, cheese. So they'll start looking for those delivery trucks in anticipation of cheese, and they'll feel so much better about it. It's important that the scary thing predicts the good thing. Otherwise, the dog can be turned off of the thing that they used to love. And you can see that at the bottom with the firework example. The real art and skill of this is finding that thing the dog really, really loves and being able to expose them to their trigger at a level that they can handle, which with some dogs can be difficult to find. LAT, or look at that, is really common, and this is essentially just putting a name on the concept of desensitization and counter conditioning. We don't require the dog to do anything other than look at the trigger, and every time they look at that trigger, you can use a clicker to click or say yes, or pick another word. And every time they look at that trigger, you can say yes, and the dog anticipates that there will be a treat. Before long, they're looking at the trigger, anticipating a treat, checking in with the owner, so they're not fixating on that scary thing anymore, but they're also anticipating something pleasant. That is behavior adjustment training. This is a little more complicated process, but it's essentially following the dog's cues by observing their body language and letting them kind of pick their own pace and what they want to do, how much closer they want to get, say, to another dog. If there's any sign of tension, we call them away. If they can be relaxed or make good choices, sniffing, walking away on their own, we let them do that. So we're really just following their lead and allowing them to be comfortable. Eat your veggies before you can get your dessert is the basic concept of the Premack Principle. Basically, you can use anything the dog wants or any behavior that the dog is more likely to perform, like chasing a squirrel, and make that contingent upon something they're less likely to do, like check in with the owner when there's a squirrel present. If the dog gets to chase squirrels, only after they look at their owner, they're going to start looking at their owner more often in order to chase squirrels. This is really helpful when working with dogs who like other dogs, enjoy other dogs, and are having a reaction just because they want to get closer to them. If we make it a rule that they aren't going to go say hi to the dog until they can be quiet or walk more calmly on leash, then the dog is going to be more likely to do that so that they can say hi to the dog. So change happens in approximations. Anytime we need a big change, we have to work in baby steps. We're not always going to be able to see everything happen right off the bat. So this is an example of working with a dog that was typically very reactive to other dogs, and we picked a helper dog who we knew was dog social and could be calm around other dogs even if they were having a reaction. So in this example, at the very, very beginning, you can see where this brown dog, Hugo, is glancing very quickly at the potential trigger, which is a dog that's on the other side of the yard, far away. At the very beginning, he just turns his head slightly to the right, very quickly, and I don't mark and reward him for that. He's kind of already figured out the game, that if I look at that dog, I can get a treat. And so he starts cheating a little bit and not really looking at the dog. So at that point, I know I have to raise my criteria and not reward him unless he really looks at the dog for a few seconds. So every time he looks at the other dog, Mahalo, I say yes, and I give him a treat. At the same time, I'm also trying to teach him some alternative behaviors. So rather than stop, stare, fixate on the dog, he can look at me instead. He can do a sit, he can do a down, he can focus on training. So I'm encouraging him to do other things so that he learns that there are other options that are highly reinforcing other than just staring at the dog, barking, pulling on leash. Hugo does have some curiosity about getting closer to the other dog. So I'm utilizing that by every time he can display comfortable, relaxed body language around the dog, we can get just a little bit closer. If at any point there's more tension or I see that he's getting more aroused or too interested, we'll walk away. So anytime I see more relaxed behavior, calmer interest, we'll move a little bit closer. If he gets too tense, too excited, we create more distance. So I'm not going to try and let him just pull me over to the dog and see what happens. I'm going to make sure that he gets closer when he's displaying the behavior that I really want. So the helper in this video is working with Mahalo at the same time. Mahalo's a social dog, so she's rewarding him for just being able to stay calm, focus on her, so that he doesn't get too frustrated that he can't say hi. So over time, we are able to get pretty close to one another. So after about 9 minutes of working on this, we are able to get about 8 feet away from each other, where both dogs can look at each other for more than a couple of seconds, and then refocus back on the handler and remain calm. So this was just working in little approximations, helping Hugo feel safe and comfortable. He gets used to this other dog being present and knows that it's not going to do anything or hurt him in any way, and that him getting closer to the other dog, looking at the other dog, means really, really good things for him. So we'll do little drive-bys, get closer just so he can kind of get a little sniff, and we can reward that relaxed, calm body language by fulfilling his curiosity. So by the end, we do let him get in for a little bit of a sniff, and he's able to achieve a little rear sniff, and he's able to still focus on me and stay on a relatively loose leash. And then when he gets too excited, he wants to mount. He's not going to be appropriate. Okay, let's go, and we walk away.
Good boy.
So I mentioned thresholds a little bit already. That just means the point where some kind of stimulus is high enough that it causes a reaction. It can really change from dog to dog or from day to day for the individual dog. The threshold for a dog isn't always the same. So let's say one day a dog may react to a trigger from 50 feet away, and then the next day it's actually okay at 10 feet away, and then it goes back again. And a lot of things can affect that threshold and how it can move and change. Sometimes if there's just more of the trigger, if the triggers are closer, if they come by faster or more often, if there's some sort of increase in intensity. So in the last video, if the other dog had been barking or reacting to Hugo, he would have reacted back because that would have been too much intensity for him to handle. Trigger stacking, which we already talked about, can affect a dog's threshold, make it much, much lower. They'll react much more quickly. And essentially anytime a dog's basic needs aren't met. Anytime I'm approaching a behavior problem, I'm always going to consider the environment and the basic needs of the dog. If they're tired, under-exercised, bored, sick, in pain, hungry, or thirsty, this is going to affect their behavior, and we need to meet those basic needs first because we can't expect them to have a very high threshold when there's a lot of other things going on. And there can always be competing motivations. So we could be trying to work with a dog, but they are far, far more interested in going to see the other dog than they are in anything that you have to offer. So you always have to consider, am I the most exciting thing in the world to this dog right now? Do I have something that they really, really love? If something else in the environment is more interesting or more valuable to them, you can expect that they will want to go for that instead of a piece of kibble. This is a visual example of what a threshold can look like. So long as the dog has more relaxed body language or just shows some curiosity, a little bit alert, they're still capable of learning. We can work with them, we can affect their behavior. Once the dog starts to get more aroused or more focused or actually becomes reactive, it's too late. We're not going to be able to give them treats. We're not going to be able to affect their behavior. The most important thing that we can do is get out of that situation so we can reduce their stress and then work with them when they're more relaxed and comfortable. If a dog is barking, pulling on leash, you're not going to be able to get them to learn anything or affect them at that point in time. It's important. You're not going to be able to change their emotional state. You just have to get more distance from that trigger or get it out of view so that they can calm back down. A lot of people say, well, the dog is reacting, so what do I do? Sometimes it's almost unavoidable when you're in the beginning stages of training. You want to get out of there. You want to stay calm. Let's say a dog is barking or reacting to something and you want to move away and create more space. Guide the dog away in a U or a C shape over to the side so that you're not just pulling straight back on the leash. A lot of times that adds more tension, add to the problem, create more reactivity. And you want to let the dog know what you're about to do. You don't want to catch them off guard. And it helps them learn what it is that you're going to want. So if a dog is reacting, and before you add any pressure on the leash, you always say, let's go, and then pull them away from it, and then you walk away and get rewarded for walking away and for calm behavior, the dog is going to be more willing to go with you and move away from the trigger. It's also important to work on skills like let's go, meaning, hey, we're going to turn around and walk away when there are no triggers present so that it can start to become a habit and the dog will respond to it more immediately. Especially in a kennel environment or a shelter environment, we use visual barriers whenever possible, just to reduce the overall stress level of the dog, make them more likely to react in general, and then they're also not rehearsing that behavior. So anytime we can use visual barriers, we will. But if the dog is already reacting, a lot of times you can step behind something so they can't see the trigger anymore. And then we want to reward them when they actually calm down. So if the dog does a shake off, or maybe then sniffs the ground and pees, this is them self-soothing, trying to calm themselves down, and we want to reward that behavior. So anytime a dog's been reacting and we can move away and then they shake off, I always praise them for that because I want them to do that more often. And always, if you can't get the dog's focus, if they're fixated, if they're reacting, you probably need more distance from the trigger. In our shelter environment, we often see fence running. The dogs will be in a play yard, another dog or a human or something will go by and they'll run back and forth along the fence. Sometimes people will say, oh, this is no problem, this is just good exercise. If the dog is experiencing distress, that's not good exercise. If the dog was bouncing along playfully and they seem relaxed and happy and we're having a good time, then this could be considered exercise. But a lot of times when dogs do this, they're actually experiencing distress. So it's the difference between choosing to go for a run on your own for exercise or being chased by something scary. One is going to affect your stress levels and your hormones much more than when you choose to go for that exercise. One of the most important things to remember if a dog is reacting in any way, either in the kennel, on leash, or in a yard, is to keep hands off. A dog is much more likely to redirect and bite if you touch them while they're reacting. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, but it's just a reflex. If a dog is displaying this behavior consistently, it's really difficult to get their attention or get them to come away from the fence. It's obsessive. And definitely, if they're trying to escape or biting at the fence, let a staff member know immediately because this dog is going to have to be marked for a different play area. Some of the things you can do if a dog is fence running, sometimes you can use a toy or a squeaker to get their attention, encourage them to come over, and then reward them with some play and attention. They may be willing to come back to you for treats, but sometimes they're just too interested in running the fence. Best thing to do is see if let's say it's a dog on the other side, best thing to do is to see if that person can move their dog away or whatever it is that's triggering the dog. See if you can remove that from the environment first so that you're not having to get hands on the dog and take a risk. When in doubt, get a staff member. You can also use a slip type lead or use a clip leash to create a slip lead and essentially lasso the dog to be able to get them away. But this is something that you shouldn't attempt unless you felt really comfortable with it. Resource guarding could be considered a type of reactivity. As I mentioned before, sometimes people will label a dog as protective or territorial. This is really just a type of resource guarding. Usually it stems from fear. of something being taken away or something invading their space or something being damaged or harmed. This could be food, toys, people, or spaces. You really want to watch out for avoidance and freezing, hovering, side-eye, hard stare, or any kind of snarling or showing of teeth. If you ever see a dog displaying this type of guarding towards you, back off, give space, face away at a 45-degree angle, avoid direct eye contact, and be calm. If you try to move forward or push the dog or try to take the item away from them, they are much more likely to bite. And if you see this, it's important to tell a staff member immediately and not try to take the item away on your own. You want to get a staff member to deal with the situation. Sometimes just giving the dog some time and space will help them be less, help them guard the item less. We never want to take an item directly away from a dog, and certainly not pull an item out of a dog's mouth. That can lead to an accidental bite. I recommend bringing 2 toys to the yard so that you can always use toys to trade, especially when teaching fetch. You can toss a toy at distance, dog will run for it, encourage them, praise them, and then show them the second toy, encourage them to come back, and wait until they drop the first one, then toss the second one. This is a great way to encourage dogs to come back to you, not be afraid of items being taken away, and learn to drop an item. It's nice to always have some higher value treats on you, something that the dog is going to find extra tasty, so that if they do get a hold of something they're not supposed to, you can always use those to get the dog's attention, and make sure that you toss that treat away from the dog so that they're leaving the item behind, not trying to take it away right from under their nose or mouth. In a shelter environment, we can't always control a dog's reaction. Like we talked about before, there's a lot of trigger stacking going on. They often can't get away from whatever their trigger is. So we have a lot of safety and management tools to keep everyone safe. We can add visual barriers to our yards or even to the tops of the kennels or the fronts of the kennels to help prevent the dog from being exposed to their trigger, which can reduce stress. We'll often try a kennel location change, so maybe the dog doesn't have to see as much of their trigger or pass by it as much. Here in Mission Hills, we'll designate a dog to volunteer yard only because it has the least amount of visual access to different stimuli. Sometimes if a dog is very strong or more likely to redirect and we really need head control, we'll train them to walk on a halty or a gentle leader. This generally takes time for the dog to adjust to, and for some dogs can take quite a bit of training and time. So it's not something we see often, but sometimes it's a really effective way to keep everyone safe. We'll often give dogs front clip harnesses in order to give the handler a little bit more control, give them a little more power over the dog. If the dog bites leashes, we'll often give them a chain leash. It may discourage them, but also prevents them from chewing on the leash and potentially getting through it. Occasionally, we'll use a modified leash or a pole leash. This is a version of a catch pole with a clip at the end. This is usually going to be for a staff-only type dog, but it is a way that we can get a dog in and out of a kennel or work with them safely to be able to keep them at a distance. One of our favorite methods is to use some kind of alternative behavior or direct the dog to something else. A lot of times we'll teach a dog to carry a toy, and this can be really helpful. The dog's frustrated, they're upset, and now they have an outlet for their frustration. Rather than barking or trying to fence fight or redirect onto the handler, now they can take that frustration out on the toy. It's a much more healthy outlet and relieve some of that frustration for them. We may also get the dog to focus on something else, like let's say we can use a little bit of a squeeze liquid type treat or peanut butter on a chuck-it stick. That might help keep their focus and attention when going past some triggers, so they're rewarded for looking at you or focusing straight ahead. And eventually you can wean them off that, but in the beginning it's a really nice management tool to deal with reactivity. It's also really important to protect yourself. You should always wear appropriate clothing, sturdy, closed-toed shoes. Strongly recommend thick denim or canvas pants, and certainly long pants are better than shorts. And you want to make sure that if you can, wear layers to give yourself protection. We also have gloves and arm guards available. These are things you can purchase for yourself, or you can check in with staff and see if some are available for you to borrow. Some dogs are walked on muzzle in order to prevent redirection, or if we're concerned that they may have a reaction to something in close proximity. Muzzle is a really important safety tool. We also have items like pet corrector and spray shield, which is compressed air, and citronella spray. Those are for emergencies if a dog's behavior is escalating and we feel like there is some danger. We may use those tools to stop a behavior or discourage a dog. And we also try to teach everyone defensive handling techniques to keep the dog out and away from your body in order to keep yourself safe and prevent redirection. And occasionally we may try behavior modifying medications if we have no control over the environment or if the dog is unable to respond to behavior modification. So just remember that every interaction you have with the dog is a training opportunity. You can help them with their barrier reactivity when you walk up to the kennel by not entering unless they're quiet. You can encourage them to be calmer during leashing up, which will help them be calmer when they leave. You don't give them attention unless they have forepaws on the floor. You can practice waiting when going through thresholds or help do look at that type exercises or desensitization and counter conditioning exercises when there are triggers at a distance that the dog can handle. Sometimes just being out on a walk or in a yard or doing group hikes or working with a volunteer friend or staff member where you can work on exposing a dog to a trigger at a safe distance. Our number one concern is always your safety. So if you ever feel like there's a dog that you can't handle, don't. Talk to a staff member, ask questions first. If you ever feel like you're stuck in a situation that you can't handle, find a safe place to put the dog or tether to the dog or some way you can keep them away from you if you have to. We always are most concerned about your safety. And if you ever aren't sure, just